She hadn't been back to the farm in 3 years, not since the funeral, not since she packed 2 bags, handed the keys to a neighbor, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror, because she knew if she did, she wouldn't leave. But now the bank had given her 60 days, the land taxes were overdue, the fences were rotting, and the old farmhouse that her husband had loved more than anything in this world was about to be swallowed by debt. So Nola came back. And what she found waiting for her in that overgrown back pasture, a horse her husband had never once mentioned, registered under a name she didn't recognize, would unravel every quiet assumption she'd ever made about the man she married. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever gone back to a place you swore you'd left behind, only to realize it had been holding a secret the whole time, just waiting for you to return? Because that is exactly what happens in this story. And the secret isn't small. It's the kind of thing that changes how you understand a person's entire life. If that kind of story pulls at something in your chest, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling me what city or town you're watching from, because these stories travel, and I love knowing where they land. All right, let's go back to the beginning. The farm had a name before it had a family: Clover Ridge. That's what the deed said, going back to 1947, when a man named Thaddeus first broke soil on those 42 acres of Tennessee hill country. The land was stubborn and sloped and prone to flooding in spring, but Thaddeus had been stubborn too, and he outlasted the mud and the cold and the doubt of every neighbor who told him the ridge was no good for crops. By the time his grandson inherited it, the farm had passed through 3 generations of men who all shared the same quiet stubbornness and the same weathered hands. That grandson was a man named Rowan. Nola met Rowan at a livestock auction in Murfreesboro when she was 26 and he was 31. She wasn't there to buy anything. She'd driven her uncle, a man named Devereaux, who needed help hauling a pair of Angus calves back to his property outside Shelbyville. Rowan was there to sell a quarter horse he could no longer afford to keep. She remembered watching him walk that horse through the gate, calm, unhurried, one hand on the lead rope and the other loose at his side. The horse was nervous. Rowan was not. And something about that stillness in the middle of all that noise and dust and bidding paddles going up and down, it stayed with her. They talked for 40 minutes, leaning against a fence post. By the time her uncle found her, she had Rowan's number on a folded receipt in her jacket pocket. They married 2 years later. Nola moved to Clover Ridge and learned slowly what it meant to live on land that had already decided what it was going to be. The farm didn't ask for her opinion. It had its seasons, its demands, its particular silences. She learned to love it on its own terms. Rowan raised quarter horses and kept a small beef herd. He sold hay in summer, firewood in winter, and did odd welding jobs for neighboring farms when the margins got thin. He was not a complicated man, or so Nola believed. He talked straight. He laughed easily. He went to bed early and woke before the birds. They had 11 years together. The last 2 were hard in a way that farm life had never prepared her for. Rowan was diagnosed with a degenerative spinal condition in the spring of what turned out to be his final full year. By autumn, he was in a wheelchair more days than not. By the following March, he was gone. He was 53 years old. The farm didn't pause for grief. Nola tried to keep it going for 5 months after the funeral, feeding the remaining horses, managing the hay supply, fielding calls from the farrier and the vet and the county extension office. But she was doing it alone, and the farm had never been designed for one person. Rowan had always been the axis, everything turned on. In August, 7 months after she buried him, she called her sister Marguerite in Knoxville and said, "I can't do this." Marguerite drove down the next morning, helped her load the 2 remaining horses into a trailer to be boarded at a facility outside Lebanon, and sat with her at the kitchen table while she signed papers authorizing a property management company to oversee Clover Ridge in her absence. Then Nola drove away. She moved into a small apartment in Knoxville. She got a part-time job at a landscape nursery. She went to a grief counselor named Aldina every other Thursday and slowly, carefully rebuilt herself into someone who could get through a full day without the weight of the farm pressing on her ribs. 3 years passed. And then a letter arrived from the First Agricultural Lending Bank of Tennessee, informing her that the property management company had dissolved, that the account managing Clover Ridge's operating costs had been depleted, and that $19,400 in back taxes and maintenance fees were now overdue on the property. She had 60 days to resolve the situation, or the county would begin foreclosure proceedings. Marguerite called that same evening. "You don't have to go back," she said. "We can figure this out from here. We can sell it." Nola was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said finally, "I need to go back. There might be things of his I haven't sorted through." That was what she told her sister, and it was true as far as it went. What she didn't say, what she was only beginning to admit to herself, was that some part of her had always known she left too fast. That grief had pushed her out the door before she'd truly looked at what she was leaving behind. She packed a bag. She drove south on I-40. She didn't know, as she crossed into Wilson County, that someone was waiting for her at Clover Ridge. Not a person. Something older and wilder than that. The driveway up to the farmhouse was worse than she remembered. The gravel had washed out in patches, replaced by red clay ruts that grabbed at her tires. The cedar fence posts along the left side of the drive leaned inward like tired old men, and the wire between them sagged in long, defeated loops. Wild privet had grown up thick along the wood line, and the grass in the front yard was knee-high, gone entirely to seed. But the house itself was still standing. That was the thing she noticed first, and it hit her somewhere behind the sternum. Relief mixed with something she couldn't name. The tin roof had held. The front porch hadn't collapsed. The windows, as far as she could see, were intact. She parked by the side door and sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood, and faintly of rowan, or maybe she was inventing that. The furniture was draped in sheets the property management company had placed before they disappeared. The refrigerator had been emptied and left open. The kitchen calendar still showed March, 3 years back, the month he died, with his handwriting in the little squares. Farrier Tuesday, hay delivery Thursday, call Pembroke Re, Eastgate. She stood at that calendar for a long time. Then she put her bag in the bedroom, changed into work boots, and went outside to assess. The barn was still solid. Rowan had rebuilt it himself 8 years earlier, and it was built to last. The water lines to the stock tanks were frozen cracked and would need replacing. The hay storage was empty. The small equipment shed held the old tractor, which she suspected hadn't started in years, and a collection of tools hung with a precision that was purely Rowan. Every wrench, every socket, every plier on its labeled hook. She walked the perimeter of the main pasture, noting the fence damage, trying to calculate what repairs would cost, doing the bleak arithmetic in her head. And then she walked around the back of the barn, toward the east side of the property, where a secondary pasture ran down toward the tree line. She stopped. There was a horse, a large, dark-coated stallion, standing at the far end of the east pasture, near the old run-in shed that Rowan had built years ago for wet weather turnout. The horse was watching her. Still, alert, ears forward. She blinked, looked again. The horse was still there. He was a dark bay, almost black in the late afternoon shadow, with a white blaze running down the center of his face, clean and precise as a brushstroke. He stood maybe 16 hands, powerfully built through the chest and shoulder, with a deep girth and hindquarters that suggested breeding, real breeding, not the practical working stock that Rowan had always favored. He was not a farm horse. He was something else entirely. Nola stood at the fence and tried to make sense of what she was looking at. The east pasture's gate was padlocked with a lock she didn't recognize, not the standard master lock Rowan had always used on the working gates. This one was a heavy brass combination lock, the kind used on boarding stalls at professional equestrian facilities. She didn't have the combination. She didn't have any record of this horse. She had never, in 11 years of marriage, heard Rowan mention a stallion on the east side of the property. The horse took 3 careful steps toward her, then stopped. She called the county extension office first, because that was the practical thing to do. She reached a man named Harwick, who handled livestock records for the district. She gave him the property address and asked if there was any registered animal on record for the east pasture at Clover Ridge. He put her on hold for 4 minutes. When he came back, he said, "Ma'am, there's a registration on file for a thoroughbred stallion. Registered name Pemberton's Last Call. Registered owner listed as Clover Ridge Farm, LLC. Registration filed approximately 2 years and 8 months ago." Nola did the math immediately. 2 years and 8 months ago. That was roughly 5 months after Rowan died. "Who filed the registration?" she asked. "The LLC," Harwick said. "I don't have an individual name here." "You'd need to look into the LLC filings with the Secretary of State's office for that." She thanked him and hung up. Clover Ridge Farm, LLC. She knew that entity existed. It was the legal structure Rowan had set up years ago for the farm's business operations. She was, as his widow, the sole beneficiary and surviving officer of that LLC. But she had never been involved in its day-to-day operations. Rowan had managed all of it. And after his death, the property management company had technically been operating under that same LLC umbrella, which meant that someone, after Rowan's death, using the legal authority of an LLC she barely knew existed, had brought a registered thoroughbred stallion to her farm and installed him in the east pasture, and that someone had apparently been feeding and caring for that horse for nearly 3 years because the animal in front of her was not neglected. His coat was clean. His weight was good. His hooves, even from a distance, looked recently trimmed. She looked back at the run-in shed and noticed, for the first time, that it had been extended. A small addition on the east end, recently built, with a newer roof and fresh-cut lumber that hadn't weathered yet. Someone had been here, regularly. She walked back to the barn and found, tucked behind the feed-room door, a laminated care sheet she'd never seen before. It listed feeding instructions, a supplement schedule, a vet contact. A large animal veterinarian named Dr. Sable out of Lebanon, and at the bottom, in handwriting she did not recognize, 2 sentences. "He should not be ridden by anyone unfamiliar. He knows what he's doing. Trust him." No signature. She stood in that barn for a long time, reading those 2 lines. "He knows what he's doing. Trust him." It sounded, in a way she couldn't fully explain, like something Rowan would have said. The next morning she called Dr. Sable. The receptionist put her through after a brief hold, and the voice that came on the line was a woman's. Brisk, professional, careful in the way that people are when they're deciding how much to say. "This is Dr. Sable. My name is Nola," she said. "I'm the widow of Rowan. I'm at Clover Ridge Farm. I just got back to the property and I found the stallion in the east pasture. I'm trying to understand how he got here." A pause. "I see," Dr. Sable said. "I've been his primary vet since he arrived. I was wondering when someone from the family would call. You were wondering." Nola stopped herself. "You knew I'd been away." "I knew the arrangement," Dr. Sable said carefully. "I was told the owner of record had been dealing with a loss, and the farm was being managed in her absence. I was paid on a regular schedule through the LLC account for routine care. I never had reason to question it." "Who arranged that? Who contacted you originally?" Another pause, longer this time. "That would be a man named Whitfield," Dr. Sable said. "He came into my office about 2 months after the horse arrived at the property. He was the one who set up the billing account. He said he was acting as a representative of the farm." "Whitfield," Nola repeated. "First name?" "I only ever knew him as Whitfield. I have a contact number on file if that would help." She wrote down the number. She thanked Dr. Sable, who before hanging added, "He's a remarkable animal, Mrs. Nola. Whatever the circumstances, he's been well loved. That much I can tell you." She sat with that for a while before making the next call. The number for Whitfield rang 4 times, then went to a voicemail with no greeting, just a beep. She left a message. She said her name, said she was calling about Clover Ridge Farm, and the Stallion registered as Pemberton's last call and asked him to call her back. While she waited, she drove into the nearest town, a small place called Calderton, 12 miles south on the state route, and stopped at the county clerk's office to pull the LLC filings. The clerk, a patient older woman named Bet Jo, walked her through the records. The LLC had been formed by Rowan 9 years ago, exactly as she'd known. The registered agent had always been a local attorney named Garrison, who handled most of the farm's legal paperwork. But there was an amendment filed 14 months after Rowan's death, a quiet administrative update to the LLC's operating agreement. It added a co-managing member listed only as W. Whitfield with a Nashville address. Who authorized that amendment? Nola asked. Betty Jo looked at the filing carefully. It appears it was executed under a power of attorney provision that was part of the original operating agreement. There's a reference here to an authorization letter on file with the registered agent, Garrison. She needed to talk to Garrison. She called his office from the parking lot outside the clerk's office. His assistant told her he was with a client, but could see her the following morning if she came in at 9. She drove back to the farm. The Stallion was at the fence line when she pulled in, as though he'd been tracking the sound of her car. She walked to the east pasture gate and stood at the rail, close enough to see the fine detail of his face, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the particular alertness in the way he held his head. "Who are you?" she said quietly. "And why did he keep you a secret?" The horse lowered his head slightly and blew a soft breath through his nostrils. It wasn't an answer, but it felt, in the irrational way that horses sometimes communicate, like an acknowledgement. That evening, she went through the farmhouse more carefully, not for structural damage this time, but for information. She pulled every filing box from the back of the office closet. She went through the desk drawers. She found invoices, tax records, hay receipts going back 6 years, veterinary records for horses, she remembered. In the bottom drawer, beneath a folded state map and a broken stapler, she found a manila envelope she didn't recognize. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten in Rowan's handwriting, and a photograph. The photograph was of the Stallion, younger, maybe 2 or 3 years old in the picture, standing in what looked like a competition paddock, with a handler she didn't recognize. On the back, in Rowan's hand, PLC, Saratoga 3 years back. The letter was addressed to no one. It began mid-thought, as if Rowan had been working something out on paper rather than writing to someone specific. "If you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to explain it properly, and I'm sorry for that. Some things I kept close, because I didn't know how to open the door to them without pulling everything else through with it. The horse is not a secret I kept out of dishonesty. He's a debt I owed, and a promise I made to a person who mattered to me before you and I found each other. I'm not ashamed of it, but I couldn't figure out how to say it in a way that would land right. Nola, if this is you reading this, the horse is yours now. Take care of him. He'll take care of you back, that much I know for certain." There was no date on the letter, no signature, though none was needed. She set it down on the desk and looked at the photograph for a long time. "A debt I owed," he had written, "and a promise I made to a person who mattered to me before you and I found each other. Before her." She had always known, in the vague way that long-married people carry the weight of their partner's past, that Rowan had a life before Clover Ridge, before the auction in Murfreesboro, before her. He'd mentioned a difficult period in his late 20s once, briefly, a time when he'd made choices he wasn't proud of and owed things he couldn't repay right away. He hadn't elaborated. She hadn't pushed. She was beginning to understand why she should have asked. Attorney Garrison was a compact, careful man in his late 60s with silver hair and the steady eyes of someone who had spent his entire career holding other people's difficult truths. He stood up when she came in and shook her hand and said he'd been expecting this conversation for some time. She sat across from him and put Rowan's letter on the desk. He looked at it, but didn't pick it up. "I found this in the house," she said. "I need you to tell me what you know about the horse and about Whitfield." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Before I do, I want you to know that Rowan never asked me to keep this from you. What he asked me was to manage it responsibly in the event that he died before he could explain it himself. Those are different instructions. Explain what he couldn't, she said. Explain who Whitfield is, Garrison said. Whitfield is not a business contact. His full name is Whitfield Calhoun. He's Rowan's half-brother. The room went entirely quiet. Nola heard the hum of the HVAC, the distant sound of a truck on the street outside. Rowan didn't have a brother, she said. Rowan didn't have a brother, he acknowledged, Garrison said gently. Whitfield is the son of Rowan's father by a woman his father was involved with before he married Rowan's mother. The family situation was complicated. Rowan's mother never accepted Whitfield's existence. Rowan grew up knowing about him only in pieces, secondhand, through things his father let slip. They didn't meet properly until Rowan was 28. She thought of what Rowan had written. A difficult period in his late 20s. He met his father's other son, she said quietly, and that was the difficult period he mentioned. That is my understanding, Garrison said. I don't know the full details of their relationship, only what Rowan told me in the course of estate planning. They were not close in the traditional sense. But there was an obligation, Rowan felt. Whitfield had gone through a period of serious financial trouble. I believe there was a failed business venture, some legal difficulty. Rowan helped him, significantly. In return, Whitfield had an asset, the horse, that he couldn't afford to keep but didn't want to sell to a stranger. He asked Rowan to take him. Rowan agreed. When? Nola asked. The arrangement was made verbally about 8 months before Rowan's diagnosis, Garrison said. The horse actually arrived at the farm about 3 months before Rowan died. Rowan managed the transition himself and installed him in the east pasture without... He paused. Without telling me, Nola finished. He told me he was planning to, Garrison said. He said he wanted to explain the whole situation before he introduced you to the horse. He said it was going to take a full evening and a good bottle of wine and a lot of patience on your part. He was working up to it. And then he got worse faster than anyone expected, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs and breathed. Whitfield, she said. He's been maintaining the horse since Rowan died. Yes. He came to me 3 weeks after the funeral. He said he couldn't let the horse go without care, and he didn't feel right just appearing at your door uninvited. He knew you'd left the farm. He asked if there was a legal mechanism that would allow him to ensure the animal's care while you were absent. We executed the amendment to the LLC operating agreement under a power of attorney provision that Rowan had, in fact, included in the original documents for exactly this kind of interim situation. Rowan wrote that provision, she said. Years before he got sick, Garrison confirmed. I don't think he anticipated this specific situation, but he was the kind of man who thought ahead. She looked at the window, at the light falling across the attorney's floor. Is Whitfield still in Nashville? As far as I know. He calls every few months to ask about the property and about the horse. He's never asked for anything else. She drove back to the farm in a state that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite wonder. It was all three braided together in a way that made her hands tight on the wheel. A brother. Rowan had a brother. And that brother had been quietly tending to a horse on her property, in the memory of a man they had both loved for nearly 3 years, without ever knocking on her door. She thought about the care sheet behind the feedroom door. He knows what he's doing. Trust him. Had Whitfield written that? Or had Rowan in some prescient moment left instructions she was only now encountering? She went to the east pasture as soon as she got home. The stallion came to her this time, walked across the field with a steady, unhurried gait and stopped 2 feet from the fence, near enough that she could see the grey around his muzzle, the faint dappling across his neck. She reached out and laid her hand against his jaw. He leaned into it just slightly. She called the number Whitfield had left in voicemail territory again. This time he picked up on the second ring. His voice was low, careful, something of Rowan in the cadence, not the words, but the pace of them. I wondered if you'd call, he said. I went to see Garrison, she said. He told me. Okay, I want to meet you, she said. I want you to come to the farm. A long silence. I wasn't sure I had any right to, he said. You kept his horse alive for 3 years, she said. You have more right than you think. Whitfield Calhoun arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a faded blue pickup truck that had clearly been worked hard. He was younger than she expected, mid-40s, lean, with close-cut grey hair, and Rowan's same way of moving through a space without taking up more of it than he needed. He parked by the barn. He got out. He stood at the fence, looking at the east pasture for a long moment before he turned to face her. "Mrs. Nola," he said. "Just Nola," she said. "Come on, I'll make coffee." They sat at the kitchen table, and she let him talk. He talked for almost 2 hours. He told her about the first time he met Rowan, at a diner outside Nashville, both of them stiff with the awkwardness of it, their father sitting between them like a man who'd come to confess something long overdue. He told her about the years that followed. Not close, not warm exactly, but real. A phone call every few months, a shared meal once or twice a year, the careful, patient work of 2 grown men deciding whether there was such a thing as brotherhood when you didn't share a childhood. He told her about the horse. His name was Pemberton's last call, Whitfield said, but I always called him Pen. He came to me through a trainer I knew. I was involved in the racing circuit for a while, before everything fell apart financially. Penn was retired from track work after a soft tissue injury. He wasn't unsound, just uncompetitive, and he was extraordinary. He paused. When I had to liquidate, I couldn't put him through auction. I just couldn't do it. And Rowan, when I called him, he said, "Bring him down." No hesitation. That was Rowan. He never told me, she said. "I know," Whitfield said. And I asked him about that. He said he was going to. He said he wanted to tell you the whole story. About me, about the family situation, about the years before you. He was private about things that cost him. He looked at his hands. I don't think he was ashamed of knowing me. I think he was ashamed of how long it took him to know me. You were close, she said, by the end. Close enough that he called me when the diagnosis came, Whitfield said. He called me before he called most people. He wanted to tell me himself. He was quiet for a moment. I came down 3 times before he died. I don't think you ever knew I was here. I stayed in town, not at the farm. I didn't want to intrude on what you two were managing. She thought about those last months, the quiet parade of people who had come and gone, the way grief had already been settling over everything like weather, before Rowan was even fully gone. He should have introduced us, she said. He knew that, Whitfield said. He told me he was running out of time and he didn't want to make things complicated for you right at the end. He said he'd leave a letter. He said you'd figure it out. He knew me, she said softly. He talked about you constantly, Whitfield said. Every conversation, your name was in everything. After he left, she walked to the east pasture and stood at the fence for a long time. Penn came to her within minutes. He lowered his head over the rail, and she scratched the base of his mane, and the October light fell golden across the pasture, and the whole farm felt different than it had when she arrived. Not fixed, not resolved, but inhabited again, the way it needed to be. The following days, Whitfield came back. Not daily. He had a job in Nashville, a life he'd been building for several years now. But he came on weekends and sometimes on a Friday evening, and he walked with her around the property and told her what he'd been doing to maintain it. He had been paying Penn's vet bills and farrier visits out of pocket for the last 18 months. After the LLC account had been depleted, he had patched the run-in shed. He had repaired the water line to the east pasture tank himself. Why? She asked him one afternoon. After everything, after years of this, why keep going? He was quiet for a moment. Because the horse was the last thing my brother asked me to take care of, he said, and I didn't have anywhere else to put that. She understood that perfectly. She called her sister Marguerite that night. I'm not selling, she said. Marguerite was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. What's changed? Everything, Nola said. And nothing. I understand now what I left behind, and I think I'm ready to stay. The money problem was still real. The taxes were still overdue, the fences still needed work, and the hay supply was still empty, and the tractor still didn't start. But the farm was not abandoned. It had never been. It had been tended quietly and faithfully by a man who had no legal obligation and no formal claim to it, only love, refracted through the memory of a brother. She began making a list, a real list. Materials costs, labor estimates. What the farm could realistically produce in its first functioning year if she rebuilt it carefully. What a boarding facility for 2 or 3 horses might earn. What it would take in real numbers to get Clover Ridge solvent again. She had savings. Not a lot, but some. She had the LLC structure intact. She had a vet she could trust. She had a brother-in-law she was only beginning to know. And she had Penn, standing in the east pasture at dusk, watching the tree line go dark with the same unhurried steadiness she had first seen in his namesake's owner 20 years ago at a livestock auction in Murfreesboro. The financial picture got clearer and harder at the same time. Garrison walked her through the LLC finances in a second meeting, this one longer, with a spreadsheet and a yellow legal pad full of figures. The back taxes could be negotiated, not eliminated, but paid in a structured plan that would keep foreclosure off the table if she made the first payment within 30 days. The property management company had left the operating account nearly empty, but they had also, crucially, maintained the property's insurance, which meant the structures were covered and had not been damaged in ways that would create additional liability. The barn was worth saving. The farmhouse was worth saving. But the farm needed income, and it needed it soon. Whitfield came to that meeting too, at Nola's invitation. He sat beside her and listened, and didn't speak until Garrison asked if he had any questions. "I have a proposal," Whitfield said. He'd been thinking about it, he said. He had worked in the horse industry long enough to know Penn's bloodline. Penn was not just a retired racehorse. He was a retired racehorse with a stakes-placed pedigree, sound, despite his injury history, with confirmation that any experienced breeder would recognize immediately. He could stand at stud, Whitfield said. Right here, with the right marketing and the right connections, you could get 4 to 6 mares per season at a very respectable fee. That's not a fortune, but it's income, and it grows. You'd need a working operation around it, he continued. A few boarding horses to offset the base costs. Maybe a small lesson program if there's interest in the area. I can't run all of that alone, Nola said. I know, Whitfield said. And then, carefully, I've been thinking about coming back to Tennessee properly. Nashville's been fine, but it's not. It's not what I want anymore. I know Clover Ridge isn't mine. I know I have no claim here. But if you needed someone who knew the horse world and knew this property, I'm asking if that's a conversation you'd be willing to have. She looked at him across the table, at the particular quality of his stillness, the way he held his hands, Rowan's hands, the same build of knuckle and wrist. That's a very large conversation, she said. I know, he said. I'm not in a hurry. She didn't answer him that day. She drove back to the farm and thought about it for 3 days. She called Marguerite, who said, I don't know Nola. He's a stranger. She called Doctor Sable, who said, I've known Whitfield for almost 3 years, and he's never once been unreliable. She called Aldina, her old grief counselor in Knoxville, and talked for an hour about what it meant to trust again. Not romantically, not like that, but in the practical, foundational way that a working farm demands. On the 4th day, she went out to Penn's pasture at first light. The morning was cold and still, frost on the grass. The ridge to the east was just beginning to catch the first light, the tree line going from black to grey to green in slow stages. Penn was standing at the far end of the pasture. She called to him softly, and he walked the full length of the field toward her without hesitation, not trotting, not cantering, just walking with that long, measured stride, unhurried and certain. She thought about what the care sheet said. He knows what he's doing. Trust him. She thought about what Rowan's letter said. He'll take care of you back. And she thought about what it meant that this horse had been here the whole time she was gone, eating, sleeping, watching the Tennessee seasons turn, held safe by a man who had no reason to stay except loyalty to a promise made to her husband. She thought about Rowan, writing that letter and putting it in the bottom drawer, not sealed, not hidden, just placed there for when she was ready. not assuming she'd find it quickly, trusting the process, trusting her. He knew me, she'd told Whitfield, and now she was standing in the frost with her husband's horse pressing his nose into her shoulder, and she understood that being known, really known, means someone leaves you things they believe you'll eventually be strong enough to receive. She called Whitfield from the fence post. He answered on the first ring. "Okay," she said, "let's have that conversation." What followed was not a fairy tale, and she would not have wanted it to be. There were weeks of careful, sometimes difficult negotiation about what a working partnership at Clover Ridge would look like, who owned what, who decided what, how the finances would be structured so that Nola retained full ownership of the property while Whitfield contributed labor and expertise in exchange for a percentage of the operation's revenue. Garrison drafted the agreement. It took 4 revisions. There was a day in the middle of it all when it almost fell apart. A misunderstanding about the extent of Whitfield's role in horse management decisions that became, briefly, an argument about control and trust, and the particular difficulty of building something with someone you're still learning. She drove out that evening and parked at the ridgeline and watched the farm from above, the barn lit from within, Pen moving slowly in the east pasture. The farmhouse with 2 windows lit, one hers, one the spare room where Whitfield was now temporarily staying. She thought, this is not the life I planned. And then she thought, but it's a life, it's real, it's still going. She drove back down. She found Whitfield in the barn, cleaning tack at the workbench. He looked up when she came in. She could see in his face that he'd been working through the same difficult calculation she had. "I'm not good at this," she said, "at trusting something new." "I know," he said. "Neither am I. Rowan should have introduced us a long time ago," she said. "Yeah," he said. "He should have. But he didn't," she said. "And we're here anyway." She put out her hand. Not for a handshake exactly, more like a marker, an acknowledgement. He took it, held it briefly, let go. They went back to the tack. She picked up a cloth and helped without being asked. The first breeding season inquiry came in February, 8 months after Nola returned to Clover Ridge. It came from a horse breeder in Lipa's Fork, a woman named Coretta, who had been looking for a thoroughbred stallion with Penn's specific bloodline for 2 seasons. She'd found the listing Whitfield had placed on a regional equine registry site, with Penn's pedigree and 2 photographs Nola had taken on a clear October morning, the light falling just right. Coretta drove out to see him in person. She stood at the east pasture gate and watched Penn move, and she said quietly and professionally, "Well, that's what I was looking for." She booked 3 mares for the coming season. 2 more inquiries followed within 6 weeks. By the time spring arrived properly, the privet along the drive trimmed back, the gravel regraded, the fences repaired in sections methodically, post by post, weekend by weekend, Clover Ridge had a functioning stallion operation for the first time in its history. It was small, it was careful, it was nothing like the grand working farm that Rowan's grandfather, Thaddeus, had imagined when he broke soil on that ridge in 1947. But it was alive. Nola also took on 2 full-time boarders, horses owned by a family outside Calderton, a mother and her teenage daughter named Lisbeth, who came out 3 mornings a week to ride. Having them there changed the texture of the place, the sound of a younger person's boots on the barn aisle in the morning, the particular brightness of someone falling in love with horses for the first time. The tax payment plan was met on schedule. By summer, the LLC account had a positive balance for the first time since Rowan's diagnosis. She called Marguerite on the first morning the account showed positive. "I think it's going to be okay," she said. Marguerite, to her credit, didn't say "I told you so" or "I'm so glad" or anything that would have felt like a claim on the victory. She just said, "I know. I can hear it in your voice." Garrison officially updated the LLC operating agreement with Whitfield's formal role. There was no ceremony to it, just signatures and copies and a handshake in a parking lot. But Nola noticed that Whitfield held the folder with the signed documents very carefully on the way to his truck. the way you hold something you've been waiting for longer than anyone knew. She walked the full perimeter of the farm that evening, all 42 acres, the way Rowan used to do on Sunday afternoons, past the barn, along the east fence line, down toward the tree line where the creek ran shallow and cold, back up through the south pasture where the grass was coming in thick and green. She ended at Penn's gate. He came to her immediately. She rested her arms on the top rail and let the evening settle around her. She didn't talk to him. She didn't need to. The last year had taught her that some things don't need to be said to be understood. A horse that walks to you across a cold field at dawn is saying something. A brother-in-law who pays a vet bill for 3 years out of his own pocket is saying something. A letter in a bottom drawer waiting without impatience, that is saying something too. She had been afraid, when she came back, that the farm would feel like a graveyard, that every post and gate and creak of the barn would carry Rowan's absence like a physical weight, and sometimes it did. She wouldn't pretend otherwise. There were mornings when she came into the kitchen, and the calendar with his handwriting in the squares just flattened her. There were evenings when the quiet of the ridge was indistinguishable from loneliness. But more and more, the farm felt the way it was supposed to feel, inhabited, purposeful, a place where something was being built. 14 months after Nola returned to Clover Ridge on a warm, late April evening, when the redbuds along the creek bottom were in full color, Whitfield found an old photograph in a box in the barn's tack room. He brought it to the house and set it on the kitchen table without saying anything. She looked at it. It was a photograph she had never seen, taken at a county fair somewhere, from the look of the background, maybe 30 years ago. 2 boys in dusty jeans, one maybe 10 and one maybe 7, standing beside a chestnut quarter horse with a blue ribbon on its halter. Both boys were grinning with the particular, unguarded joy of children who don't yet know that anything is complicated. The older boy was unmistakably Rowan. The younger boy, she looked closer, had Rowan's chin, Rowan's ears, Rowan's way of standing with his weight shifted slightly left. "Is that you?" she asked. "I didn't know the picture existed," Whitfield said. "It was in a box of things his mother must have left when she cleared out after he died. She never acknowledged me, but she kept this." She picked it up carefully. 2 brothers standing together at a fair, holding a blue ribbon before the world got complicated. "She kept it," Nola said quietly. "I don't know what it means," Whitfield said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe she just forgot it was there. Or maybe she knew," Nola said, "and couldn't throw it away." She put the photograph on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, in the place where Rowan used to prop important pieces of paper he wasn't ready to file yet. It stayed there. They never moved it. Coretta's 3 mares produced healthy foals that spring. 2 were colts. The 3rd was a filly the color of dark honey, with a white star on her forehead and a temperament so calm and curious that Lisbeth, the teenage boarder, declared on her first visit that the filly was her favorite creature on the entire planet. Nola let Lisbeth name her. She named her Ridge. There is something about a working farm, about the particular, relentless, non-negotiable rhythm of it, that resists sentimentality while insisting on meaning. The hay still needs cutting. The water lines still freeze in January. The books still need to balance. There is always something that needs doing, and the doing is what keeps the grief from becoming the whole story. Nola understood now, in a way she couldn't have articulated when she first drove back down the rut-worn driveway, that Rowan hadn't just left her a farm. He'd left her a set of connections, to the land, to the horse, to a half-brother he'd loved, in the careful, partial way that family history sometimes forces on people. He'd left her a structure that would require her engagement, her presence, her decisions. He'd left her things that needed her. That wasn't accidental. That was Rowan, thinking ahead, writing provisions into documents in case something happened before he was ready. Choosing a stallion not just for the bloodline, but for the temperament, a horse that would stand at a fence and wait for a grieving woman to come back. He knows what he's doing. Trust him. She thought sometimes that the instructions on that laminated card weren't only about the horse. The farm runs now, not perfectly, nothing agricultural runs perfectly, but steadily. Glover Ridge has a small reputation in the regional horse community, built on Penn's breeding record and on the quiet quality of the operation. People who come to see the stallion comment on the farm, how it feels cared for, how it has, as one breeder put it, a sense of history about it. Nola took that as a compliment. It was meant as one. She and Whitfield are not close in the way that long-known people are close. They are close in the way that two people who share a serious responsibility become close. A working closeness built from problem-solving and disagreement and the accumulation of small reliable acts. She trusts him. He trusts her. That took time, and it cost something, and she thinks it was worth every bit of what it cost. Some evenings, she sits on the porch after the day's work is done and watches the east pasture, where Penn grazes in the long last light. She thinks about Rowan. She thinks about the letter in the bottom drawer, waiting for her without impatience. She thinks about all the things we carry toward the people we love, and all the things we never quite manage to put down in front of them in time. And she thinks, I know, but you got it done anyway, Rowan. You got it done. You know what I love most about this story? It's not the horse. I mean, Penn is extraordinary. Of course it is. A stallion kept safe for 3 years by a half-brother who had no obligation, waiting on a farm for a woman who didn't even know he existed. That alone is a story. But what really stays with me is the letter. Rowan didn't seal it. He didn't hide it. He put it in the bottom drawer, the place where you put things you're not ready to deal with yet, but that you know you're going to need eventually. He trusted that she would come back. He trusted that she would find it. He trusted her even past the point where he could still be present to watch her receive it. That kind of love, quiet, structural, patient, is the kind that doesn't make a lot of noise in the moment. It doesn't announce itself. It just waits. And Nola found it. Not quickly, not easily, but she found it, which makes me want to ask you something before you go. Is there something or someone in your life that you've been meaning to go back to? A place you left before you were ready? Something that's been quietly waiting? Sometimes the thing we drove away from is the thing that still has something to show us. If this story moved you in any way, if it reminded you of someone, or of some place, or of some version of yourself that you'd like to find your way back to, leave me a comment below. Tell me what it brought up for you. I read every single one. If you're new here, subscribe. New stories go up every week. Real, human, cinematic, the kind that take their time. And if this one was worth an hour of your evening, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Until next time, take good care of yourselves, and if there's something waiting for you somewhere, don't make it wait too much longer.